to help end this conflict. We need to keep pushing our European allies to increase cooperation on security.
Will provide more foreign aid, more humanitarian support than the next 10 countries combined, than the entire OECD, and far more than China. China doesn't do humanitarian aid. China does predatory lending. That's what Belt and Road Initiative is. That's what all of their aid. They have zero record of doing humanitarian aid in the world. And frankly, they don't know how to do it. They have no interest in doing it. What they're very good at is going into some country, making you a loan, and then holding that debt over your head. And that's what they continue doing. By the way, you have to hire a Chinese company to do it. So I don't agree with this assessment that there's no evidence whatsoever that China has either the capacity or the will to replace the U.S. in humanitarian assistance, in food deliveries, or in developmental assistance for that matter. We provide development assistance. They provide debt traps. And that's a point over and over again around the world that we've made, and we found receptive audiences to it. Now look, anytime you undertake reforms of this magnitude that needed to be made, you're going to have hiccups and you're also going to have controversy. But these reforms had to happen. At USAID, 12 cents of every dollar was reaching the recipient. That means that in order for us to get aid to somebody, we had to spend all this other money supporting this foreign aid industrial complex. We're going to find more efficient ways to deliver aid to people directly, and it's going to be directed by our regional bureaus, and it's going to sponsor programs that make a difference, and it's going to be part of a holistic approach to our foreign policy. And I look forward to engaging with this committee and the appropriators as well, and ensuring that we get to the right place on that. My last point I would make, and this is something I am very proud of. I believe, and I'm not besmirching anyone else, but I believe that the approach we have taken at the State Department, and frankly at USAID, but at State Department, to move forward reforms that involved intake from all of our partners, that required input from people within the building. Many of the reforms we've made were driven by people inside the building, many of whom have worked there for 20 or 30 years. And now we are engaged with Congress, both in the House and Senate, in a comment period where we're taking many of your comments and are making changes to our organizational proposals that we look forward to bringing back to you with an official congressional notification. And even after that, there'll be an opportunity to move forward. But the State Department had to change. I'm telling you, it was no longer at the center of American foreign policy. It had often been replaced by the National Security Council or by some other agency of government, when in fact we have these highly talented people, many of whom have served in multiple posts around the world and have a holistic view of how foreign policy needs to be conducted, that were being edged out. Because you know what? When I get a decision memo early on at the State Department and they would hand me these memos, there were 40 boxes on this piece of paper. That means 40 people had to check off, yes, okay, before it even got to me. That's ridiculous. That takes too long. That's why people said, don't use State Department. They take too long and it's too cumbersome. And any one of those little boxes didn't get checked, the memo didn't move up the chain. That can't continue. We can't move at that pace in this world. Events happen quickly, and we have to be able to move at the pace of relevance. And so I hope to work with you in a productive way to make that possible. You're not going to like all the changes, but I want you to know what the intent of the changes are. It is not to dismantle American foreign policy, and it is not to withdraw us from the world. Because I just hit 18 countries in 18 weeks. That doesn't sound like much of a withdrawal. And I see some of these foreign ministers, including individuals from Ukraine, more than I've seen my own children. And I talk to them at least 3 times a week. We are engaged in the world, but we're going to be engaged in a world that makes sense and that's smart. And that isn't about saving money. It is about ensuring that we are delivering to our people what they deserve, a foreign policy that makes America stronger, safer, and more prosperous. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. We're going to do a round of questions. We'll go 7 minutes since we have a secretary here. And I'm going to start. One of the things that you mentioned, and admittedly, what we're dealing with here is a large number of subjects. I want to focus on one that Senator Shaheen and I have worked together on, and that's the Syria matter. Thank you and the President for suspending or lifting the sanctions on Syria. I think the next step, and I think you agree with us that both Syria and Lebanon are opportunities for us. And we need to explore the opportunities with a careful eye on what's going on to make sure it stays on track. I think the next step, as far as I'm concerned, as far as moving Syria forward, is getting personnel on the ground there. And you and I talked about the possibility of opening the embassy. And I understand that this isn't a classified setting, but can you maybe describe for us the challenges of opening the embassy, why we haven't done it to this point, staying within the bounds of the
Yeah, well, it's entirely driven by security concerns. By the way, it's not the transitional authorities. We don't think they would harm us, but there are other elements on the ground in Syria that we have to be able to protect our
Important
people.
point.
And there are the ability, you don't just have to be able to get people in, you have to be able to get people out. We have all kinds of requirements that are there for a reason. If someone is hurt, do you have a medical evacuation plan? Can you secure a facility from an attack from an armed group, many of whom are still running loose in the country, unfortunately? It's one of the fundamental challenges the transitional authority is facing. On the broader point of Syria, I would say when Syria, if you look at the history of the region, when Syria is unstable, the region becomes unstable. And this has certainly been true after the Arab Spring led to the Assad rebellion against Assad, and that really destabilized the entire region. And then it turned Syria, frankly, into a playground for jihadist groups, including ISIS and others that used it to operate and to destabilize their partners. So you have this change in December. And my view, which I've discussed with many of you individually, is the bad news is that the transitional authority figures, they didn't pass their background check with the FBI, okay? They've got a tough history and one that we understand. But on the flip side of it is, if we engage them, it may work out, it may not work out. If we did not engage them, it was guaranteed to not work out. In fact, it is our assessment that, frankly, the transitional authority, given the challenges they're facing, are maybe weeks, not many months, away from potential collapse and a full-scale civil war of epic proportions, basically the country splitting up. The good news is that there is a Syrian national identity. It is one of the places in the Middle East where Alawis and Druze and Christians and Sunni and Shia have lived and Kurds have lived alongside each other underneath the banner of a Syrian identity until it was broken by a butcher, Assad, who pitted them against each other. So they face a number of challenges. The first is they are dealing with deep internal distrust in that country because Assad deliberately pitted these groups against each other. He claimed to be the protector of the Alawis and the Christians and pitted them against the Druze or whoever else he wanted to, and the result is a deep level of distrust. The second is the displacement, upwards of 6, 7, 8 million Syrians living abroad, very successful, by the way, in the countries they go to. But we need to figure out how we can enable the transitional authority to create an environment where they come back home, where they can come back to their homes, where they can help rebuild their economy. But what prompted the president to move quickly on sanctions? Because we had a plan. We engaged with the foreign minister at the UN here in New York. We gave him a visa to come into the country. We allowed their finance minister to come to World Bank meetings here in Washington, D.C. The next step was I was going to meet with the foreign minister, and some of you may have met with him already at Munich, but I was going to meet with him in Turkey at the NATO gathering. But the president had an opportunity to meet with al-Shara, and frankly, he made a bold decision. I'll do it. I'll meet with them under the Saudis and the Turks that encourage that. And the rationale and the reason is we need to, right now, the most important thing is that partnering nations, the nations in the region want to get aid in, want to start helping them, and they can't because they're afraid of our sanctions. So they don't. The lifting of the sanctions, its most immediate impact will be to allow neighboring countries to begin to assist the transitional authority to build governance mechanisms that allow them to actually establish a government, unify the armed forces under one banner and the like. But I want to be frank, that won't be enough. With the Caesar Act, we can issue waivers, but these waivers, because of expirations on them, are not going to attract the kind of foreign investment. Ultimately, there's going to have to be something done congressionally or more comprehensively to ensure that if the right steps are taken, we can create an environment for private sector growth that begin to provide economic opportunity to the people of Syria. But one last point I would make is the outcome in Syria will have a deep impact on what happens inside of Lebanon, because Lebanon too has been hurt by a combination of clashes at the border, but also they've had to assume responsibility for some of these Syrian refugees.
We believe that, by the way.
So the combination, if you think about a region, let's say 2 years from now, where Syria and Lebanon are stable, that opens up incredible opportunities around the region for all kinds of peace and security and the end of conflicts and wars. Obviously, this is a big task. It's big picture thinking, but it's a historic opportunity and one that we are obligated to try to explore and see if we can make it work.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think we're in full agreement with this, and it is a conundrum as far as the sanctions are concerned. We've got the 6 months, but as you say, the future. It's hard to predict the future since it hasn't happened yet, as Yogi Berra used to say, and there are real issues and risks in the future. We can take it a step at a time. You issued a visa to the foreign minister. Senator Shaheen and I met with the foreign minister in Munich. You issued him a visa to come to New York, which was important to meet with other heads of state. Do you have the ability to do that for the president also?
Sure. I mean, we could, and there may be an opportunity to do that come the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Yeah, probably will be, and I think that's important. Let me, we do hear a lot of complaining and renting of garments over cuts here and there on our foreign assistance. But the number you laid out is absolutely stunning. That the United States contributes more to foreign aid than the next 10 countries put together. I mean, that's an absolutely stunning number. So I guess what you're telling us before we feel too guilty about it, that we need to look around and compliment ourselves for what we are actually doing and have been doing for a long time. Fair statement?
Yeah, there's no doubt. And we want to do it in a smarter, more targeted way.
Yeah. Lastly, let me give you a minute on PEPFAR. People talk a lot about the cutting in PEPFAR. And I think virtually everyone here supports PEPFAR. But you've done some things to it to make it better. Can you give us a short dissertation on that? Very short, please.
85% of PEPFAR is functional right now. I know there was some hiccups on the payment systems, not the waivers, the payment systems, because it goes to Treasury. Treasury has to push the money out. And there were some hiccups, which I acknowledged in conversations with many of you, but we have fixed that program and the money's flowing. So 85% of PEPFAR is functioning and is operating. There was reduction in about 15% of the individual pieces of the program, but PEPFAR today stands at 85% of functionality. And when I hear these stories about, well, the money's like, we're moving money out of the building every single day, 20 million one day, 35 million the other. I mean, money is moving out the door. It's going to somebody. Some of it is going to pay for work that was conducted in December, January, February before the freeze. So we are paying back invoices on some of them. But most of it, a lot of it, is going towards ongoing programmatic activities that are approved and that we've either through a waiver and or approval process are moving forward on.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have a number of questions, but I first want to go back to what you had to say about China, because I agree that their efforts are predatory. But I think somebody may be missing what they are doing in response to our ceasing of foreign assistance in places. And Mr. Chairman, for the record, I'd like to submit this fact sheet. The PRC supporting international assistance as U.S. withdraws. It's dated April 29th. And just to give you a few examples, earlier this month, General Michael Langley, who's the commander of U.S. Africa Command, I sit on the Armed Services Committee, and when we asked him about the end to specific USAID programs, he stated that the PRC is trying to replicate, in quotes, specific USAID programs in Africa that the Trump administration cut, including PEPFAR. And I mean, there are several pages of these examples. Another one is in Cambodia. After the U.S. terminated $2 million in demining programming in Cambodia, the PRC immediately announced $4.4 million to expand its own demining programs. The PRC also recently stepped in to fund child literacy and nutrition programs previously supported by USAID. So we can pretend that China is not doing these things and picking up and promoting themselves as a reliable partner when the United States is not. But we have specific examples that show where this is happening. But I want to move to Ukraine because we heard the conversation that the president had with Vladimir Putin, the phone conversation where Putin didn't agree to any meaningful negotiation that would end this war in Ukraine. As President Trump has admitted, Vladimir Putin is taking him for a ride. Now, we have a bipartisan bill in the Senate that's led by Lindsey Graham. It has 80 sponsors. I understand that the House members are ready to take this up on a discharge petition if we pass it out of the Senate. How much longer until we rein Putin in? And are you prepared to support that sanctions bill that Graham and Blumenthal and 78 other members of the Senate support?
Well, let me answer your last question first, and that is about the bill. We obviously can't control what Congress does, and we've told the Russians this. Not now, 6-8 weeks ago. I believe, Senator Shaheen, you were involved in a conversation that made it clear to the Russians what would happen if there was no progress made. And that's been repeated multiple times. I would also make this point, and it's important. Every single sanction, not one sanction has been lifted on the Russians. Every single sanction that was in place under the previous administration remains in place. So this idea we've given up leverage, well, the only we have the same leverage today we had under the previous administration.
Well,
now,
Mr. Secretary, I would argue that the leverage that we've given up is taking NATO membership off the table, taking away a commitment to continue to help the Ukrainians with intelligence sharing and with military equipment and arms that they need to help fight this war.
Well, that continues. There was a pause for 1 week. All of that was restarted.
That was intelligence sharing, though, but it doesn't cover the equipment and arms.
Oh, absolutely. That program has not been rescinded. They continue to receive armaments from the United States.
To fund what the Ukrainians need as the president, and are you prepared to pass another supplemental bill to support them?
Well, that's a different decision. That's a different question. That's not up for me to decide. The White House would have to make a determination about whether to come to Congress for a supplemental. But everything that's been approved and congressionally appropriated is ongoing. In fact, to the extent that the Ukrainians have asked for anything additional, what they've asked for is air defenses, Patriot units, which frankly we don't have. But we are working closely with our NATO allies. There are NATO allies that do have some batteries of Patriot missiles that they could provide or transfer over to the Ukrainians to defend, for example, the airspace of Kyiv and other places. And we've been encouraging in that front and working alongside our partners there to get deliveries of some of these systems. As you can imagine, none of these countries want to give up their Patriot systems either. But we can't make them fast enough. And part of the challenge we have in Ukraine is that munitions are being expended substantially faster than the ability of the broader West, not just us, but the West, to produce them. Now, that said, on the issue of Ukraine, here's what we can all agree on. There is no military solution to this crisis.
Right.
It will have to end in a negotiated settlement. And the fundamental challenge we have in Ukraine is this. Russia wants what they do not currently have and are not entitled to, and Ukraine wants what they cannot regain militarily. And that's been the crux of the challenge.
I don't disagree with that at one level, but on the other hand, what Vladimir Putin is doing now is playing for time, and he's playing this president like a fiddle. And the longer he plays it, the more opportunity he has to gain territory in Ukraine, and the harder it's going to be to get him to the table. But what we need to do is to put pressure on Vladimir Putin in every way we can to ensure that we can get them to the negotiating table.
Well, I disagree with this playing with a fiddle analogy, because the truth of the matter is when Vladimir Putin woke up this morning, he had the same set of sanctions on him that he's always had since the beginning of this conflict, and Ukraine was still getting armaments and shipments from us and from our allies, and the European Union is about to impose additional sanctions, and the U.S. is looking for no Patriot batteries to be able to transfer from other NATO nations into Ukrainian hands. And what the president's trying to do is end a war. He's trying to end a bloody, costly war that neither side can win, and people are dying every single day. But this notion that what has Putin gained throughout this? He hasn't gotten a single concession. He hasn't gotten a single sanction lifted.
And the more time he gets without additional pressure on Russia, the more incentive he's got to continue to gain territory and continue to play for time. But I want to just get to a final question because my time is running out. And that is, I recently wrote a letter to you about the issuance of executive orders on thousands of Afghan allies. These are people who fought alongside our military during the war in Afghanistan. They've been stranded in Qatar and Albania and Pakistan and Afghanistan. These are individuals who have been vetted already. They're ready to travel to the United States. And the question I have is this administration going to allow them to come to the United States as it promised? Because unless we're willing to keep our commitments to those people who were willing to fight and die alongside of us, then how can we ever ask people to do that again?
Yeah, a couple of points. Some of those are I think the issues that is getting mixed up here is whether we are going to pay for them to fly to the United States once a visa is issued, or whether they have to find their own transportation to the U.S. So there's two separate topics: our payment to move people forward, but also the issuance of the visas. And when that is still going through an internal review as to who is going to be allowed in, there's been a review of the vetting process that's been used. Frankly, there have been some errors found in the previous vetting process that we're concerned about, and I'm separating out from that audience people who we have closely vetted because we've been working alongside them for many years with regards to their service alongside our intelligence forces or special operators on the ground from the broader. Remember, they're also bringing dependents with them. And so there were some concerns early on about freezing or slowing down this program until we could determine whether we were properly vetting people to come towards the United States. And that process is ongoing, and I think we'll have more concrete answers for you, which I know is not satisfactory at this moment, but we've obviously had a lot going on. But this is something that we've heard a lot from both our DoD partners and others in the intelligence community, and we're working to make progress on that.
I'm out of time, but just to clarify, on last week, Secretary Noem announced that temporary protected status, which I understand is not exactly the same, but for over 8,000 Afghans would end on July 12th. Many of those people are people, again, who fought and died alongside of our men and women in the military. And for us to send them back to sure death at the hands of the Taliban is just not what they were promised when they agreed to fight with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Rubio, welcome. The United States is at its most dangerous time in our history since World War II. And we know, we can see what Russia's done in Europe. We know the increasing aggression of communist China, Iran, North Korea. I want to hit upon Iran real quickly here. As you know, this is a theocracy that's got brutal mullahs and a corrupt military. They chant death to America, death to Israel. You've had 4 rounds of negotiations with them so far, and I think you framed it best when you said earlier this month they have to walk away from sponsoring terrorists, they have to walk away from helping Houthis, they have to walk away from building long-range missiles that have no purpose to exist other than having nuclear weapons, and they have to walk away from enrichment. That was your quote earlier. And that enrichment is particularly important, as you've stated, and Steve Witkoff reemphasized over the weekend, the ability to enrich at 3.67% for a civilian program. It only takes a few weeks to get to 90% for a military-grade weapon. Now, what I'd like you to just talk about real briefly is, what are you thinking about when you say they've got to get rid of their nuclear program, they've got to have complete disarmament? Is it still the policy that they cannot be allowed to enrich at all in Iran?
Thank you. Well, obviously, these are ongoing, I hope to be ongoing negotiations, because the alternative would be far worse, in my view, but maybe necessary. But we hope that we can reach an agreement with Iran. So here's the baseline that I've described to everybody on it. If what Iran wants is a civil nuclear program, energy, you know, the ability to develop nuclear energy, there's a model for that multiple countries around the world currently follow. And that allows them to build reactors and then bring in enriched material and use it to generate electricity. And that's a model that will be available to Iran potentially if they choose to take it. If, on the other hand, they want to retain enrichment capability. And I just described this because if anyone's watching this or in the future, this can get a little complex. All of you understand it, but for the general public, it's important when you get into the details of this. Once you know how to enrich at any level, all you need is time to be able to enrich at a higher level. And they've already proven the ability to enrich at a higher level. In fact, they have and are doing so now. In fact, their legislative branch passed a law requiring them to break JCPOA and enrich way beyond, almost well beyond 60%. So you're absolutely right. About 90% of the work of enrichment is getting to that 3.67 level. After that, the rest of it is just a matter of time, not to mention what the gap is from the 20% for medical isotopes, which is the other thing they insist upon. So the Iranian position is that they don't just want energy. They claim that enrichment is a matter of national pride. It is our view that they want enrichment as a deterrent. They believe that it makes them a threshold nuclear power and as a result becomes untouchable. And that is the crux of the situation we're facing right now. And there are other actors, and I won't go much deeper into it, but there are other nation states in the region that are also range from uncomfortable all the way to view as an existential threat the belief that Iran could ever be in a position of maintaining its enrichment capability in the long term that could quickly be weaponized. So that is the basis upon which we are negotiating with the Iranians. Our hope is that we can encourage them to show them a path towards prosperity and peace that allow them to develop their economy, that allow them, if they want, to have a civil nuclear energy program like other countries around the world have without enrichment. And it's our hope we can encourage them in that direction. The president has been very clear, and I won't elaborate any further, that they are never going to get a nuclear weapon. That is not going to happen. But I much prefer, and I would venture to guess all of you would much prefer, if we could reach an arrangement where they agree to this off-ramp, to this pathway towards prosperity and peace, as opposed to the road they have been on for the last 20 years. And it will not be easy, but that's the process we're engaged in now.
Right, thanks. So let's go to Communist China, because they're the greatest existential threat that we face as a nation. We both agreed last time you were before this committee that we need an all-of-government, not just an all-government, but we also need an all-of-society approach on how we face Communist China. This was illustrated in a recent table talk exercise that I did with Senator Coons and others, and I'm talking about contingency where Beijing tries to do an energy quarantine on Taiwan to force them to capitulate. And obviously unlocking Americans' energy is one of the ways that we can help counter this with LNG and biofuels, some of our strongest tools to be able to help our allies and partners. Cutting red tape, unleashing American energy in the private sector, we're positioned to be an energy supplier here of choice. But we need the infrastructure in place, and that includes having a West Coast LNG terminal. Can you talk a little bit about what you're thinking about when it comes to this type of contingency with regard to an energy quarantine in Taiwan and how the administration would approach that?
Well, first of all, it would be devastating. The U.S., as you know, has agreements in place and assurances it's made on maintaining the status quo in that region, and those will remain viable without trying to be alarmist here. We know what those are, and we hope that never happens. But I think the broader issue that you touch upon, which I don't think is widely understood, again, members of the committee who follows this closely understand it, but more broadly, is the dangerous imbalance that has developed between China and the rest of the world on a number of fronts. The first is on access to rare earth minerals, which they have secured access rights all over the world on virtually every continent. They are predominant and or leading in their access. And it's one of the points of frustration that I have. You go to a country and you see how much money we've given in humanitarian aid, but when it comes to rare earth mineral rights and exploited, rights to natural resources, it's all on the Chinese side. So where's the connection between the aid we give to help countries survive and the fact that the Chinese are going in and somehow from these governments, bribery or otherwise, getting a hold of all these rare earth minerals and leases and contracts all over the place, not just in Africa, in Latin America, all over the place. The second is processing. They process all these rare earth elements. So we are literally, if they decide one day we're going to cut the world off, and they've threatened to do so to some extent with these trade negotiations, you won't be able to build an engine in this country. You won't be able to build a rocket or any of the things that we use in daily life. This is a very dangerous situation that's developed that has to be addressed as well. A lot of it will require domestic changes in our own country and building up our own domestic capabilities, for example, to refine rare earth minerals and to process, but also just to make things. Pharmaceuticals, another dangerous imbalance. We were, all this talk about them getting close to the Europeans. They're dumping on the European market. They're dumping electric cars. They're dumping all kinds of products because they're overproducing. They don't consume. So they dump all these products onto the European marketplace. But you know what the Europeans are very concerned about? The Italians in particular. They used to lead the world in pharmaceuticals, at least in the precursors and the key elements and the basic ingredients. Now the Chinese dominate 80-something% of that industry. They could cut off our medicine. So I think when you talk about energy, I could apply that to a host of critical industries in the 21st century. If we don't address that imbalance, which is what we're hoping to do with some of the trade proposals, but also domestic matters that the administration is taking on, we're going to be in real tough shape here very soon if we're not already.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I see my time is up, but I look forward to continuing to talk with you about how we can create this all-society strategy to be able to fight back against Communist China, because you just laid out a lot of the things that we're at risk at, and we have to have a way to be able to push back on them so that they don't decide to try to take Taiwan by force or try to do an energy quarantine, which could lead to a war which would be devastating for everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. A sobering analysis of where we are on the supply chain. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Thank you, Secretary Rubio. Look forward to 2 sessions together today. This afternoon, you'll be in front of the Appropriations Subcommittee. And I think there's going to be some themes across both of these. First, I think we all agree that China poses our single greatest geopolitical threat and that we have no choice but to deter China across the board and to outcompete China. Senator Ricketts and I just traveled to the Philippines and Taiwan and saw directly the challenges that we face there and regionally. And you've recently had some significant successes, the DRC, Rwanda, peace transition, the avoidance of escalation in India and Pakistan, the opening towards Syria. But I also frankly think that there's been a real lack of coordination and some serious harm to our standing in the world with some of the countries that we have worked most closely with over decades. The DOGE-driven, abrupt, and largely illegal cancellation of billions of dollars of contracts for humanitarian relief and aid, and the disrespect and the dismissal of thousands of AID staff and our NGO partners stands in sharp contrast to the state reorganization process you just presented on in your following. You've submitted plans and proposals. We're having a conversation. You're going to send a congressional notification. We're going to have a hearing. That's the way that the reforming of USAID could have and should have happened. And so I just at the outset had to say, as someone who spent 15 years traveling the world, visiting both our partners and allies, looking at independent or semi-independent agencies like the MCC and the DFC and their role, and visiting NGO partners and the USAID, I reject the broad characterization of them by Elon Musk and Doge as criminals who were wasting taxpayer money. You've heard across all of us support for PEPFAR, concern about humanitarian relief, and the vision that this is a key strategic asset for us. It's my hope that we'll work together to actually make real a more effective, focused, and sustainable foreign aid component to what STAY does, and sustaining organizations that we help build together, like the MCC, the DFC, and the Global Fragility Act. So let me turn to this for a moment. My colleague, Senator Shaheen, made reference to places in the world where the CCP and the PRC have stepped forward. I agree, they're never going to deliver humanitarian aid the way we used to, and with the breadth, depth, and effectiveness that we have. But I also think they're taking advantage of the opening to say that we're not reliable, that our decades-long partnerships can't be sustained and extended, and to question our motivations. So I think we need to step out quickly to avoid creating a big hole in our credibility globally. Let me just start on a few questions with Ukraine. The previous administration worked closely with our partners and allies in Europe on sanctions to tighten them, to close loopholes, to extend designations. Are you continuing to do that?
Work with our allies?
To tighten the
Yeah,
sanctions?
so, well, first of all, the Europeans have their own set of sanctions, and we've coordinated with them very closely. In fact, the president had a call with at least 6 leaders from Europe yesterday. I had meetings with what we call the Quint, that include Italy, Italy, France, the UK, the Germans, the French. So we are in constant contact with them on the work that they're doing, and they're proceeding along their own route. And in fact, in our conversations in the past with the Russians, we made clear to them that the Europeans and ultimately will have to be at the table because they have their own set of sanctions that they're imposing. So the answer to your question is we have worked very closely with them. The president understands fully the options he has available to him, some of which are represented in the bill before the Senate.
In the bill before the Senate that Senator Graham and others have led and that I co-sponsor, I think we have an opportunity to put more pressure on Russia and to push Putin to get to the table and to agree to a just and enduring peace. Do you support that sanctions bill? And do you think we should continue to arm Ukraine and to strengthen the sanctions against Ukraine in order to create the conditions for a real negotiation?
Yeah, look, it may come to that point. If in fact it is clear that the Russians are not interested in a peace deal and they just want to keep fighting a war, it may very well come to that point. The president has made that in the past. Our belief, the president's belief, is he believes that right now if you start threatening sanctions, the Russians will stop talking. And there's value in us being able to talk to them and drive them to get to the table. We'll see. Look, they have to do this. No one's claiming that this is a guarantee.
President Zelensky reversed himself, showed up, was ready and willing to negotiate. And Putin, I think, my view, continues to play for time.
Well, so
I hope that we can work together to put more pressure on Putin to get to the table and to resolve this. The other thing that I see clearly, and I think many of my colleagues do, is that what happens in Ukraine sets the table for what happens in the Indo-Pacific. That there's an increasing coordination between the Russians, the Iranians, the DPRK, and the PRC. Do you see that as well, Mr. Secretary?
Well, we remind our European allies every day that were it not for China, Russia would not be able to sustain this. And they're fully aware of that. And obviously, we all understand the presence of the North Koreans and the Iranian role in this as well. But by the same token, I would say there's a flip side to that, and that is every minute we spend, every dollar we spend on this conflict in Europe is distracting both our focus and our resources away from a potential for a much more serious, much more cataclysmic confrontation in the Indo-Pacific. So the answer is yes, they are related, but they're related both ways. They're related on the one hand by the precedent that it could set, but they're also related by the fact that every minute that we spend on this conflict that cannot be won by military means, every resource that's expended into it is money and time that's not being spent on preventing a much more serious confrontation from a global perspective in the Indo-Pacific.
You made the point earlier that, in your view, we did not coordinate well enough between countries where we for decades had done humanitarian aid, disaster relief, public health work, and countries that ally with China in terms of resource mining and processing. One of the countries we visited was the Philippines. The Philippines is the most disaster-prone country on Earth. They have more typhoons, volcanoes, earthquakes than anywhere else, and they are a treaty ally of the United States. Yet we abruptly canceled a whole series of programs that provided disaster assistance, development assistance, and humanitarian aid. My hope is that we will work together to follow an appropriate and legal process to reform foreign aid and to align it with our values and priorities. I've long seen the MCC and the DFC as critical components in pushing back on what you correctly perceive as the PRC's extractive engagement with much of their region. What do you see as the future for organizations like the MCC and the DFC? And when we next speak this afternoon, I'll be pressing you on the America First Opportunity Fund and understanding how this nearly $3 billion Agile fund will fit into the picture for the future of aid.
Yeah, on DFC, we don't control those two entities. They're independent. They're both undergoing a review. DFC, I think, has the opportunity to potentially even expand. That's not a commitment, but I'm telling you there's talk about that. On Millennium Challenge, I think that I saw some reporting out there that it was being imploded. My understanding is the way it's being approached is that it's being reformed but not done away with. It was actually created as an alternative to the way we did aid with USAID. And so there's work happening on both of them. So my personal view on DFC is I think DFC has an opportunity to perhaps do more. And it's the sort of investment we want to make around the world in the way it's structured. And on Millennium Challenge, it's undergoing a review right now, but the review is designed to improve it, not to eliminate it.
Well, we should talk more directly about that. I'm concerned that what's happened in other agencies is happening there. The overwhelming majority of the headquarters staff being suspended or fired, and then compacts eliminated more quickly than it's being reformed. Same thing with global communications through USAGM, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia. I'm concerned that we are conceding spaces to the PRC when we should be working together on a shared objective, which is to deter and compete successfully with the PRC. Thank you.
Senator Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, as you talked about visiting 18 countries and not being with your kids, I had a pain of guilt with you being here today, but thank you for making this a priority and being with us today. This might surprise some of my colleagues and maybe even you, but for the last several years, I've led a Republican delegation over to the Conference of the Parties, COP, and I believe that a Republican voice is really important at that table. I would point to issues, for instance, like nuclear. When I first started attending COP, nuclear was out of power, and we were shouting from the housetops that we had to have nuclear power, and I think that's shown the influence of a Republican voice over there. Your agency has done, and I applaud, a lot of reduction in cost cutting. Part of that's been the State Department's Office of Global Change, which would normally handle the COP arrangements. I'm wondering who we would work with, and if you've given any thought of who we can coordinate to make sure the U.S. and that we have a good presence over there in Brazil.
Yeah, so that'll be rolled into our Economics Bureau and the restructure. And I think on the energy front, it's actually going to be at the forefront of foreign policy for the next 100 years. One of the reasons why just AI alone and AI development alone is going to put a strain on energy, the amount of energy that it's going to take to produce AI and AI-driven innovations will, we just don't produce enough global energy to meet it. And so it's going to provide two things: the strategic opportunities for nations that can deliver cost-efficient energy and in a sufficient volume, it's going to become an enormous opportunity for these countries to be leaders in the AI space. But the other is it's going to put a strain on everybody else because it's going to use up those energy resources. So we need to be at the table to have conversations about how, not just what our role in energy is, but how we help invest or partner with countries that have a supply of energy. So as an example, Paraguay has a hydroelectric plant right now, and they were in a long-term deal with Brazil where they sold them 50% of the energy being produced. That deal is now expired. They're trying to figure out what to do with the 50% of electricity generated by hydropower that is no longer going to be going to Brazil. And they can't put that in a tank and ship it overseas. So someone, if they're smart, is going to go down to Paraguay and open up an AI facility. Guyana has just made extraordinary discoveries on natural gas and oil. This is a country that's going to become incredibly rich very quickly and has an opportunity to both invest that wealth to develop their society, but also become a platform for other industries that could help strengthen the region.
For the sake of time, I just would love to work with the State Department on that, make sure we have a good presence for that message. I also believe the United States can carry a message that you don't have to give up affordability, you don't have to give up reliability, and we can also be clean. I think that's a really strong message for us. Foreign assistance has been talked about a lot today, and I'd like to just point out that there are a number of philanthropic entities in Utah. We have the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who are really ready to stand up and go to work. I know Catholic Charities, there's many like that, and just want to make sure you're factoring those into kind of your rebuild and restructure. I know there are a lot of people like that ready to jump in and be part of this.
Absolutely. And just to go back on foreign aid for a moment, we're going to be doing foreign aid. We're going to be doing humanitarian relief, disaster relief. We're going to be doing all the things we've done before, maybe not some of the same projects, but we're going to be doing all of it. The difference is it's going to be coordinated out of the umbrella of the State Department, and it's going to be part of a cohesive, coherent foreign policy. And it's going to be driven by our embassies and our regional bureaus. So in the case of the Philippines, which was brought up a moment ago, we're going to rely not just on the region, the bureau here in Washington, but in our embassy on the ground to help us every single year construct what aid needs to be delivered, be it humanitarian or disaster relief or the like, to that country. And that's been missing, that sort of cohesive approach to how we treat foreign aid as a tool in our broader toolbox, as opposed to its own toolbox altogether. We want to make it part of our broader toolbox on foreign policy.
Yeah, and I think my only footnote is, as we do that, let's keep in mind that many people are willing to participate and be part of this without a drag on the U.S. tax dollar that I think can complement the vision that you just laid. I've had the opportunity to work with you on the House side on some legislation and to some degree fill some of your big shoes here on Taiwan and Hong Kong. And I just wanted to touch on that briefly. I know Senator Ricketts brought up Taiwan with the recent implementation of more national security laws and the blockade-style drills around Taiwan. How can Congress better work with you and your department to support you and make sure we're doing everything that we can do?
I mean, unfortunately, with Taiwan, I think with Hong Kong, as we've seen, is its autonomous stand. I think our law now reflects that is no longer real. It is basically an extension of, and I think one of the great examples of that is a company named Hutchison Ports, which is headquartered in Hong Kong, and they control two of the main facilities, the two main facilities on the Panama Canal. And everyone was saying, well, they're not a Chinese company. They're not Chinese. They're a private Hong Kong company. Well, when Hutchison Ports decided they were going to sell, all of a sudden the Chinese government's put all kinds of pressure on them, and it slowed down the deal. So how can it be if this company is an independent Hong Kong company, why do they care what the Chinese authorities think? Well, the reason is because they are under Chinese control and Chinese influence. And the fact they're headquartered in Hong Kong is no longer a protection from that. So I think it's important for us to understand Hong Kong cannot become a place where China can evade, be it sanctions or restrictions, by simply hiding behind some company who has an address there. It is sadly, tragically, and unfortunately, fully under the control for national security perspectives of authorities in Beijing.
And sadly, as part of that, has lost all of the values that were in Hong Kong before, of a free press, of free people, that went with that as well.
Yeah, those are incompatible with authoritarian rule.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Curtis. Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Before I ask my questions, I just ask that after this hearing, you go back and reconsider a claim that you made in your opening statement. It would certainly shock Americans to hear that only 12% of our foreign aid reaches recipients, needy recipients on the ground, the people who need the help. That is not actually an accurate number. That is the amount of our aid that goes directly to local groups on the ground. But as you know, most of our aid runs through bigger international organizations like Save the Children. Those entities are getting somewhere around 80–85% of the aid we give them directly to recipients on the ground. And so I think what you've done to shutter USAID is illegal, but I also think it's bad policy. And I do think it's important for us to all be operating with the same set of facts. And the fact is not that only 12% of taxpayer dollars are ending up in the hands of the people who really need it on the ground. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to talk to you about the president's personal business interests. During his first term, he made the decision to not enter into any new business deals during his presidency, that Trump-affiliated businesses would not enter into any foreign business arrangements. And that made sense because obviously it can be confusing for foreign governments to know how to try to win favor with the U.S. government if they have one route, making concessions that are good for U.S. national security, and they also have another route, which is perhaps helping the president's business interests. The president obviously changed that policy, and in this administration, his business interests are announcing new agreements and new investments into those business interests by foreign governments. And I think it stands to reason that creates a real problem for foreign policy, and it creates a problem for foreign governments in which they don't exactly know what the best way is to try to get on good terms with the U.S. government and with the White House. Is it to do what's right for American national security, or might it also be to do a business deal with the President of the United States or the entities that he controls? Just to clarify, when the President's businesses are engaged in negotiations, for instance, with the UAE on their stable coin business, there was this big investment announced recently. You are not part of those negotiations. Those are being done by the president's family or those representing the president's business.
Yeah, I'm not aware the president's involved in managing any business. He's other than the presidency of the United States. His family is allowed to make business deals. They continue to operate the enterprises that his family ran. I also don't accept the notion that these deals, for example, in Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Qatar, had anything to do with the president. For example, the Qatar bought $200 billion worth of airplanes from Boeing. The president's not as far as I know, not a shareholder, certainly doesn't own Boeing. So the overwhelming, if you look at the deals that were structured, they were involved in investments in the United States. That's the deals he signed, and or investments in, for example, the UAE or Saudi Arabia involving artificial intelligence.
UAE did announce a massive investment in World Liberty Financial, and World Liberty Financial is controlled by the president. And the president does actively engage in these businesses. He uses his social media to market the businesses that are being run by his family. I mean, just go on to his social media feed and you will see him marketing his meme coins. So that is the president of the United States. That is not his son's doing.
But that, just to be clear, that was not part of this. That was not an announcement as part of this trade visit that was conducted into the Middle East.
Well, whether or not it was made during the time the president was there are obviously business deals being done between Trump entities and these countries. Let me ask you about the one that is probably most confusing to this committee, which is the planned gift of a plane to either the United States government or the president. Is it your understanding that this luxury plane that Qatar has offered the president, and the president has announced he is willing to accept, is a gift to the United States government? Or is it a gift ultimately to the president himself that he can use in his library?
Well, you'd have to talk to the Department of Defense, because this is a replacement or at least a temporary bridge plane for Air Force One, the new Air Force One, which is way off its delivery schedule. And so that would have to be with the Air Force. They operate Air Force One. My understanding of it basically has been from the very beginning that this is a plane that was identified after talking to Boeing about what other planes around the world would fit the bill that are out there that could be used now. They identified the ones that Qataris had as an opportunity for one, and as a result, or the UAE had that as opportunity for one. and that's how that deal is.
And it's not your understanding that the plane ultimately will belong to the president or to the president's library after.
Well, I'm not involved at that level of it. I've never heard that before. What I've heard is that plane will replace Air Force One, which is an Air Force plane.
Let me ask you about the dinner that's happening this Thursday night. The president has offered access to him to the 200 top purchasers of his meme coin. Reports are that maybe about half or more of those individuals who will be meeting with him, many in a VIP reception, are foreigners. Do you have a list of those foreign individuals who will be meeting with the president?
I don't. I don't know anything about. I didn't even know there was a dinner on Thursday night, so I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So you don't know whether any of the foreign individuals who are going to be meeting with the president this Thursday night, for instance, are on our list of sanctioned individuals, or whether any of those individuals have connections to, let's say, terrorist organizations abroad?
Well, I think if they had terrorist links, the Department of Homeland Security probably would not have allowed them into the country. But I don't even know there is a dinner on Thursday. You're asking me about something I don't know about.
Well, but listen, this is a dinner that the president is having. It is likely going to involve some very significant foreign interests. You have to be pretty wealthy in order to be able to get inside this dinner. Isn't that a relevant question for the Secretary of State?
Yeah, I'm not the social
Which foreign
secretary,
interests are going to be speaking to the president? I mean, it's kind of naive to believe that they aren't going to be in that room talking about national security matters.
Well, I don't think that that's the case at all, because I would be aware if it was the case. The truth of the matter is I interact with government officials and others in governments of other countries. That's what I don't say. You're asking me about a dinner I don't know anything about. I can't answer you because I don't know anything about this dinner. It's the first I heard of it. Like I said, I don't keep the president's social schedule. It's not on my phone. It's not in my pocket. I don't even know. I can't comment on a dinner I know nothing about.
Yeah, I think that represents a real problem for this committee, because there is clearly a way around the State Department for foreign individuals of significant influence and wealth to be able to directly lobby the president of the United States.
But I don't think
your
that's
answer
fair.
is that you don't know this is happening.
Well, I don't know that there's
that
a dinner.
in and of itself is.
I don't know that there's a dinner, and I don't know what the guest list is. But I can tell you, I've run into the president of FIFA from the World Cup. He's here all the time. I see him. He's a private individual. It's not a government entity, and he's met with the president and is friendly with the president. He doesn't have to go through me to meet with the president. The president has relationships and friends and people he's known for a long time. Some of them are foreigners. That's not unusual.
Yeah,
but you're asking me about a
for
specific dinner
time.
and
These
implying
are
nefarious impact. I can't comment on a
meeting
on
with
a
the
dinner.
president. I think you should probably endeavor to get your hands on the list to make sure that there aren't individuals there who are perhaps contravening national security interests that the
Well, I don't think
Department
that's,
of
I don't
State
have any
is
concern about that.
prioritizing.
Ultimately, I don't have any concern that the president having dinner with someone is going to contravene the national security of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In response to an earlier question, you sort of posed a question back. What is one thing that has happened during the Trump administration that has strengthened Vladimir Putin's hand in Ukraine, mentioning that the sanctions were still in place? I just would like to introduce for the record an article dated February 28 from NBC News titled "State Department Terminates U.S. Support of Ukraine Energy Grid Restoration."
That'll be entered in the record.
I was in Ukraine the day after the Palm Sunday bombing in Sumy and spoke to USAID staffers who'd all been riffed. They're going to be laid off either the middle of the summer or early September. I'm aware that that's subject to litigation, but they talked about the fact that the grant cancellation canceled a grant that USAID had in place, hundreds of millions of dollars, that has been used repeatedly to restore the Ukrainian energy grid after attacks by Russians. I could give other examples. That is the one that is most present on my mind since I was just there. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you about the program. It's the United States Refugee Assistance Program. And this is a program that state is the manager of, but together with other cabinet secretariats, DHS and HHS, state plays the lead management role. And it is how to manage the U.S. refugee assistance programs in tandem with contractors who help the United States on that. By an executive order on the first day of his presidency, President Trump paused all refugee programs and has canceled contracts to the agencies like the U.S. Catholic Church or Lutheran Refugee Services or HIAS or Church World Services who've been resettling refugees. Those programs are paused. There's litigation about it, but as far as I know, the United States is not, or the administration has not withdrawn the executive order. So there's essentially, from this administration, no refugee programs for anyone except. In early February, the president announced a special refugee program for Afrikaner farmers, justified A, by some concerns about South African foreign policy, but B, a claim that these were persecuted individuals. So right now, the U.S. refugee program allows a special program for Afrikaner farmers, the first group of whom arrived at Dulles Airport in Virginia not long ago, while shutting off the refugee program for everyone else. Do you think Afrikaner farmers are the most persecuted group in the world?
I think those 49 people that came certainly felt they were persecuted, and they've passed every sort of check mark that had to be checked off in terms of meeting the requirements for that. They live in a country where farms are taken and land is taken on a racial basis.
Okay. Do you think they're more persecuted than Uyghurs or Rohingyas, or more persecuted than political dissidents in Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua, or more persecuted than those who would be threatened should they be returned to Afghanistan by violence by the Taliban?
Well, the problem we face there is the volume problem, okay? If you look at all the persecuted people of the world, it's millions of people. They can't all come here. And we had refugee programs.
So why prioritize Afrikaner farmers?
Well, because it's a small subset, it's a new issue, and the president identified it as a problem and wanted to use it as an example. But that's different from having these refugee programs that were basically spending money to put people up in communities and accommodate them, and it was acting as a magnet. Millions of people in this country illegally, and today the border is sealed.
Let me challenge you, and I'm just going to say for the public, if you want to understand about the, quote, persecution of Afrikaner farmers, go look at the composition of the South African government. Since July of 2024, there's a government of national unity, and the opposition party to the ANC, the Afrikaner Party, the Democracy Alliance, is part of the governing coalition. They joined the governing coalition a year ago, and the leader of that party was given the remit of Agriculture Minister, John Steenhuisen. He is the leader of the former Afrikaner Party, still widely representing Afrikaners. He is the Minister of Agriculture in South Africa right now. I assert that this claim that there's persecution of Afrikaner farmers is completely specious. Are you aware ever during the apartheid era in South Africa did the United States establish a special program to allow South African blacks who were treated as second-class citizens in the apartheid program, a special program so they could claim refugee status in the United States?
No, because I was probably in 9th grade or 8th grade at the time.
Well, then I don't expect you to know. I'll just tell you, never has there been a special program for Africans to come in as refugees to the United States. We've allowed special programs for people being persecuted for their religion, Soviet-era Jews. We've allowed special programs for people fleeing from communism, Cuba, Vietnam, the Soviet Union. We've never allowed a special program to allow Africans into the United States in an expedited refugee status until now. Afrikaner farmers living in a nation governed by a government of national unity that includes the main Afrikaner Party. And actually, an even more right-wing Afrikaner Party is also included in the coalition government. Now, would you agree with me, Mr. Secretary, that if we're interpreting the statutory phrase, a well-justified fear of persecution, we should try to do that in an even-handed way?
I think we should try to do that in the interest of the national security of the United States.
So okay, I agree with you too. We should. Should we try to do it in an even-handed way? So for example, should we say, if you're persecuted on the grounds of your religion, we'll let you in if you're a Christian, but not if you're a Muslim?
I think that the United States has a right to allow into this country and prioritize allowance of who they want to allow to come in.
But
I'm going
to ask you, what? Yeah. So a well-justified fear of persecution?
Yeah, they thought that their farms were being burned down and they would be killed. I think that's a pretty good justification for wanting to come. They're afraid for their lives.
And should it be applied in an even-handed way? That's an easy.
No, our foreign policy doesn't require even-handedness. It requires prioritizing the interests of the United States.
The phrase says you are entitled to entrance as a refugee if you demonstrate a well-justified fear of persecution.
No, you're not entitled.
So
You're
can
allowed.
you have a different standard based upon the color of somebody's skin? Would that be acceptable?
Well, I'm not the one arguing that. Apparently you are, because you don't like the fact that they're white, and that's why they're
to
coming.
say that would be unacceptable.
Well, no,
that
I would say that the
seem to
United
be
States,
a very easy thing
the United
to say,
States has a right to pick and choose who they allow into the United
even
States.
based on the color of somebody's skin.
No one's. You're the one that's talking about the color of their skin, not me. These
You're
are people whose
refusing to
farms were being
acknowledge
burned down and they
them
were
to be
killed because of the
even-handed.
color of their skin.
Well,
Well, you've demonstrated enough because you think anyone should be allowed into this country for any reason because they met a certain
Who has
criteria.
said that?
We are going to prioritize people that come into our country on the basis of what's in the interest of this country. That's a small number of people that are coming.
But
in
you
that
said
particular case.
this weekend that
but
there
in
would
other
be more.
cases, it's harder to vet. In other cases, it's more difficult. And by the way, the United States admits people every year. 1 million people come to this country every year legally. 1 million
And
people
now
a year come to this
there
country
is one
legally.
group
No
of
other
people
country
that
in the
have
world
an
is nearly as
easy
generous.
pass into this country. For the first time, this administration has said Afrikaners get an easy pass and refugee programs for the remainder of the world are shut off. And you can't say to the American public that we should apply this statute in an even-handed way.
No, I
I'm
think it
shocked
should be
at that,
applied in a
and I
way.
yield
No, you
back.
shouldn't be shocked. It should be applied in the national interest of the United States. Our immigration policy should be based on the national interest of the United States. Period. End of story. If there is a subset of people that are easier to vet, who we have a better understanding of who they are and what they're going to do when they come here, they're going to receive preference, no doubt about it. There are a lot of sad stories around the world. Millions and millions of people around the world. It's heartbreaking. We cannot assume millions and millions of people around the world. No country can. So you have to have a process of deciding who do you prioritize, who do you allow in. We do it all the time. We do it in our immigration system now under our current laws. Unfortunately, it's primarily based on family connection and not on what they're going to contribute to the society from a merit standpoint. That should be changed, but that'll require statutory changes. But the bottom line is this notion that somehow we have to accept anyone who wants to come to the United States is absurd. No country in the world has an immigration policy like that.
And no one is arguing that we should. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Daines.
Secretary Rubio, it's great to see you here today. Very proud of what you're doing in your role. Grateful to call you a friend and to watch what you're doing now around the world with working on the president's agenda. Secretary Rubio, I want to talk about energy for a moment. Our allies in Europe are waking up to the security and economic threats posed by their reliance on Russian energy. Despite some progress, many of our European partners still are hesitant to diversify their energy portfolio, energy sources, and ensure they can literally keep the lights on. This recent nationwide power outage in Spain provided a timely reminder that intermittent sources of energy cannot replace reliable baseload power that comes from fossil fuels or other steady sources. So despite their acknowledgement of this threat, Europe is still making it very difficult for energy companies to do business on the continent. In fact, the European Commission promulgated regulations in the last year regarding ESG due diligence and methane emissions that will soon make it all but impossible to do these reporting requirements for major gas exporters to do business in Europe. Secretary Rubio, how can you work with our partners in Europe to build a more reasonable, broader, more diverse energy trade and regulatory framework that allows companies to deliver power that Europe so badly needs?
Well, obviously, when you talk about the European Union and these individual countries, they have a degree of sovereignty. They'll have to make these decisions. We can certainly, in our conversations with them, remind them of the vulnerability of their energy grid. It is, I think, everyone's consensus belief that one of the factors that went into Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine is his belief that Europe was so dependent on him for energy that they would do nothing about it if he did it. And that turned out to be the case. Now you've seen some countries moving faster than others to diversify. For example, I believe on Saturday was the first delivery of U.S. LNG to Italy. They've opened up a terminal now to accept it. There are other countries that are looking, but obviously these things take time. But I think the case in point, if in fact that's what led to the collapse of the grid, and there was, by the way, a collapse today in their telecom system as well in Spain, is a reminder of the vulnerability of energy, the vulnerability for purposes of just conducting 21st century commerce and economics, but also vulnerability potentially to being used as a geopolitical weapon against you. So I sense that among many of our allies in Europe, particularly those on the eastern flank, there is a growing, and I would say not just awareness, but a growing fear of how vulnerable they are on energy, both to foreign actors and because of the strains that are going to be placed by AI and other new technologies on our energy grid in the years to come.
Secretary Rubio, I want to shift gears for a moment and come back to a part of the world that doesn't get a lot of attention, but very strategically important, that's Central Asia. Think about Central Asia, the 5 countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. When they wake up in the morning, they look north, they see Russia. They look to the east, they see China. They look south to Afghanistan. They look south and west to Iran. There is great potential that I don't believe is being utilized. An example of that is the lack of a trans-Caspian pipeline. You've got these 5 Central Asian countries, the Caspian Sea. 20 miles is all that's needed right now for an interconnector to basically connect Turkmenistan into Azerbaijan and then into the network pipe, the gas line pipeline, certainly throughout Europe. It's just 20 miles for that interconnector. Turkmenistan has the 5th largest reserves of natural gas in the world. Huge potential, and obviously with their neighbors of China and Russia and Iran, getting that gas out is a challenge, but there's a path forward through the Caspian Sea. Mr. Secretary, do you believe that completing that 20-mile Caspian interconnector would be in the best interest of the United States and our allies?
I think the answer is yes. That's what you're saying. I mean, it sounds to me that way from what you've described. I can't say I'm an expert on those 20 miles, but I could certainly see from your argument, the way you put it forward, that it makes all the sense in the world. And it reminds me, once again, of why we want so much of our foreign policy to be driven at the regional and embassy level. Those are exactly the kinds of opportunities that in a different context, where how we were conducting energy policy would be lost, those are exactly the kind of opportunities that would be driven from the bottom up. Ideally, we would have embassies and we would have individuals in the bureaus that would identify these operations, and within that bureau be able to operationalize it by conducting energy diplomacy. Potentially, are there American companies or allied companies? I apologize. Are there American companies or allied companies that can contribute to that effort, that can help us to fill that gap and provide the contracting work needed?
Yeah, you know, and Secretary, what's fascinating is when you engage those countries. And I was the first U.S. Senator to be in Turkmenistan and Tajikistan in 13 years when I went over there last November.
As you can see, energy is a very emotional thing to me.
It is, Mark. I get choked up too thinking about it. But they talk about multi-vector diplomacy over there because you've got the Russians and the Chinese who are actively engaged right now. And I think there's a bit of a vacuum as relates to the United States, and we can help fill that vacuum because they want to work with us. They were thrilled with this election in November. I spoke with every one of the Central Asian presidents, each one of them, one-on-one meetings. They were very pleased to see the outcome in November. And now they're ready to move forward here with a close relation to the United States. And I think Azerbaijan and that interconnector could be, as they say, that is the cork on the wine bottle of Central Asia that could actually unleash some of this energy and move it towards allies and friends of the United States instead of being dependent on Russia and China. By the way, they've been a very valuable ally in the global war on terror, as well as a counterterrorism mission here as well. I would just throw out in terms of your radar, because you've got a lot on your plate right now, Mr. Secretary, but I think we could encourage the modernization of trade relations in that part of the world where there's, frankly, a lot of great power competition going on. But anyway, Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you up here. Godspeed, and thanks for all you're doing for our country.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and greetings, Secretary Rubio. And it's a pleasure to work with you when you were in your Senate capacity on a number of human rights issues related to China, Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong, and certainly the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which I think is a standard and a strategy I hope will spread to other countries to reject goods made by slave labor in China. Today, however, I want to wrestle a bit with another what I consider to be a humanitarian tragedy, the conditions in Gaza. I very much supported Israel going after Hamas following October 7th, but we are now well over a year and a half into this, and there's a new phase of events, which I'll try to summarize. 6 months ago, Finance Minister Smotrich said Israel should thin the population through voluntary migration. He also used the term encouraged migration. These terms are considered a euphemism for forced displacement. And the strategies of forced migration are food denial, the demolition of homes so that there's no place to return to, and driving people from one area in the Gaza Strip south to the southern side. Then there is a new plan called Operation Gideon's Chariot, mass call-up of troops in Israel. And Netanyahu said a few days ago, he said, we're going to take over all the areas of the Gaza Strip. By the way, on that forced displacement or the demolition of homes, I want to put up a chart to accentuate the point. This is satellite images done by the New York Times that show before the war, the detailed homes, mass damage before the ceasefire, and then since the ceasefire, absolutely the entire neighborhood turned to rubble. There's just basically nothing left that is habitable. So I wanted to just make the point that it's not some theory about the strategy. The strategy is being implemented very aggressively and effectively. But let me return to the issue of food denial. The Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimated that in February, 2,000 children were admitted for treatment of acute malnutrition. I was thinking about the strips that are used. They're called MUAC strips, mid-upper arm circumference. It's basically a measure of the bicep. And I saw them I went to areas that were under starvation in Africa, and I saw these being used, and you'd see a child, and you would think this child is just maybe 2 years old, and they'd be 5 years old, and their arms as thin as toothpicks. And I was struck when a UN health representative returned and said, and I quote, "I've seen them in the wards," referring to the hospital wards, "a child of 5 years old, and I thought he was 2 and a half. So Ulcha said 2,000 children acute malnutrition. That's a nice way of saying we're starving. In March, there were 36 children admitted for acute malnutrition. The denial of food the blockade began March 2nd, so the numbers are undoubtedly up much higher in April and now into May. The World Health Organization reported a couple days ago that 57 children had died from the effects of malnutrition. That blockade shows signs of being changed. Netanyahu has made some public comments. He said, "We will not stand by." "We cannot reach a point of starvation for practical and diplomatic reasons." He went on to say that mass starvation is a red line that could cost Israel support from the U.S. He didn't say it was a humanitarian problem, but support from the U.S. And yesterday, 5 trucks went in, and there's a plan to get up to 100 trucks. But 5 trucks is 1% of the amount needed for daily food supplements, and 100 trucks is still only 20% in an area that's already extremely hungry. This has led Canada, France, and Britain to say we cannot stand by while the Netanyahu government pursues these egregious actions. The level of human suffering is intolerable. So I guess my question here is the U.S. is a very close ally to Israel, both in military, security support, certainly in economic support. Is the administration conveying to the Netanyahu government that encouraging migration through food denial is an unacceptable strategy?
Well, let me say I won't discuss, obviously, for many different reasons, what we share with our partners and allies. But I will walk you through some of the steps you've rightly outlined, what has happened
It's
over the
not
last...
too long a speech, because I'm really trying to get where our administration is standing.
Well, I'm still trying to get the Senate out of me, so I still talk longer than I should,
Yeah, well,
so I'll be more brief.
I'm going to have to reclaim some time, but go ahead, try to keep
No,
it very...
well, you want me to answer?
I do want you to answer, but hopefully answering the question is pretty simple. Does the U.S. consider this an acceptable strategy of encouraging migration?
Well, I would say that we were pleased and to see that aid is starting to flow in again. I understand your point that it's not in sufficient amounts, but we were pleased to see that decision was made. I understand another 100 trucks are behind that and maybe more in the next few days. I'll also tell you that I met in Rome 3 days ago, with the World Food Program to walk through some of the ideas and plans they had for distribution on the ground. And ultimately, the answer here is for this to end, hopefully with the elimination of Hamas, because the people of Gaza deserve a more prosperous, peaceful future, which they'll never have as long as Hamas exists.
Well, thank you. That was brief and well done. Thank you. So then the second part of this is the systematic destruction of remaining homes as a way to make it impossible for people to stay in Gaza. Does the U.S. discourage that? Is it discouraging the Netanyahu government from continuing that strategy?
Well, we don't view that that's their strategy. We understand that they are targeting elements of Hamas, is what they have claimed and said to us and to the world, that they believe that they need to root out the remaining elements of Hamas, who, by the way, have been an impediment to multiple ceasefires that I know have been negotiated and even agreed upon by Hamas external and then vetoed by Hamas internal.
Is the U.S., it sounds like then, therefore, we're not concerned about that, or you characterize it differently. There has been reports of the administration working behind the scenes to develop a plan to help deport Gazans to Libya. Have you been involved in any discussions related to deporting people from Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza, to Libya?
No, there's no deportation. What we have talked to some nations about is if someone voluntarily and willingly says, I want to go somewhere else for some period of time because I'm sick, because my children need to go to school or what have you, are there countries in the region willing to accept them for some period of time? But those would be voluntary decisions by individuals.
Well, if there are voluntary decisions because there is no clean water, there is no food, and bombing is all around you, is that really a voluntary decision?
Well, ultimately, that's the point, right? And that is you don't want people trapped there. They may want to come back. They may want to live there in the future, but right now they can't. And if there's some nation willing to accept them in the interim period, yes, we've asked countries preliminarily whether they would be open to accepting people, not as a permanent situation, but as a bridge towards reconstruction.
Does that include Libya?
I'm not aware of Libya.
Thank you. I will just summarize since my time is up. I think the U.S. has a moral responsibility to fiercely convey to the Netanyahu government that using food as an instrument of war is unacceptable. It's a violation of international humanitarian law. It's mass punishment. We have now children who are dying, and while Netanyahu has said he doesn't want to see mass starvation, he's drawing the line at mass starvation, but we're seeing real starvation right now, and I think we owe it to our connection and our close relationship to Israel to powerfully convey the importance of not just 5 trucks a day like yesterday or 100 trucks a day, but enough food to end the starvation. Is that a policy you can get behind?
To ultimately rebuild and provide people a future in Gaza?
To get behind enough trucks to end the starvation.
Yeah, we've made that point. Look, I think ultimately, I don't think you would have seen the events of the last couple of days without our engagement, the engagement of others. Israel remains a strong ally. We're supportive. We understand why, for their security, Hamas cannot exist. We are also very happy to see that they have allowed aid to begin to flow, and we hope that that will continue.
Concluding comment, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your tolerance. It's an important topic. Netanyahu did say he was responding to remarks and pressure from American politicians. I assume that's the administration saying that America cannot accept mass starvation, but I would encourage you to push not for 5 or 100 trucks, but enough food to end the fact that children are starving and adults are starving, innocents are starving. Our close relationship, we need to end it.
Senator McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Shaheen, and Secretary Rubio. Good to see you. It's always great to have you here. let me start with Iran. I'm deeply concerned, as I know you are, about Iran's nuclear ambitions. And I agree wholeheartedly with President Trump's view that there must be complete dismantlement of Tehran's nuclear enrichment capabilities. A key flaw, as you know, in the JCPOA was its failure to address Iran's support for terrorist proxies. And we've seen the horrific results of that. What assurances is the administration seeking from Iran on its support for terrorist proxies as part of the negotiations?
Well, interestingly enough, the negotiations initially have been focused entirely at this point, although obviously we're aware of their sponsorship of terrorism in the region, including the Houthis and Hezbollah and other groups such as this, the militias in Iraq, and their efforts to get back into Syria. Right now, the focus at this point of this has been their enrichment capability, and they're insistent on enrichment capability. Ultimately, I would say that if in fact we have sanctions that are related, things such as sanctions that are related to the sponsorship of terrorism and their violation of weapons conventions and the like, their long-range munitions, those sanctions will remain. If those aren't part of the deal, then the sanctions will remain as a result of that. But initially, I could say that the focus of the conversations over the last few weeks with Mr. Witkoff and the Iranians has been on this enrichment matter, which is by far the sort of the core and most critical matter. As you know, the Iranian position is that they have a right to enrich as a matter of national pride, and our view has consistently been that they can have a civil nuclear program without an enrichment capability, and that an enrichment capability, in fact, would be weaponized at some point in the future, or could be weaponized, and that's a threat that cannot be accepted.
Good, thank you. On Syria, I know that many of us are eager to work with you on implementing the president's plan to lift sanctions and protect key U.S. priorities. What assurances is the administration seeking in your discussions with interim authorities on counterterrorism priorities, including the fight against ISIS, during the process of lifting the sanctions?
Well, ISIS hates the transitional authority, and they hate al-Shara, and they hate everybody in his government, and I think pose a grave risk to them. So I don't think the issue with them right now is a matter of willingness or a lack of willingness. It's a lack of capability. So there will have to continue to be a role to play in the interim period, both by the United States and our allies and the Kurds and others, in ensuring that ISIS cannot metastasize and grow. One of the most threatening things that we would face, for example, is an ISIS prison break, where suddenly you have a bunch of ISIS fighters loose on the streets and undermining the government. But I do think that part of this dynamic and why we're in a race against time is that every day that goes by that the transitional authority does not have control of the government and or of daily life in some extent, or able to provide basic government services, is a day that ISIS has the ability to reconstitute itself and grow as a threat, both to the transitional authority but ultimately to the broader region. So I don't sense from them a lack of commitment and desire to do something about it. I think, frankly, it's at this moment a capacity issue. They simply, at this moment, do not have the capacity to assume the anti-ISIS effort by themselves. But we hope that with a fully integrated Syrian military that includes the Kurds and everybody else, if you can have no other armed groups in the country except those under the authority of the Syrian government, then I think you begin to make progress. But we're not there yet. That's going to take some time to build, and we look forward to helping as much as we can and as much as little as they want.
Along those same lines, as you know, Turkey has significant interest in Syria and has been, I think, an important part of the steps that have recently taken place. But our allies in Israel and Jordan are concerned about Ankara's ambitions there, especially in southern Syria. How are you managing those tensions and allied concerns as it relates to Turkey's role in Syria?
Well, in the case of Israel, we've had conversations with them about this, what we view as an opportunity for Israel. If in fact Syria is stable and has in it a government that has no interest, as they have said, in fighting a war with the authorities have said it. Now, obviously, you have to prove it, but they have said this is a nationalist project. They are seeking to build a nation. They're not viewing themselves as a launch pad for revolution. They're not viewing themselves as a launch pad for attacks against Israel. So we think this is an extraordinary thing. If, in fact, you have in Syria a stable government that encompasses all the elements of their society and has no interest whatsoever in fighting wars with Israel over borders or anything else, I think that's an extraordinary achievement for Israel's security. Obviously, they're concerned about the Turkish presence, and we've done some things to deconflict on that front. And I think one of the key points is going to be foreign military basing inside of Syria. And that is, at some point, the Transitional Authority will have to make a decision about whether they're going to allow foreign military basing. That includes Russians, but potentially the Turks have wanted that as well. especially in the central part of the country. Now, the Turks do have a presence in the north, as you know, and one of the things that our Central Command was very influential in doing is helping the Transitional Authority enter a preliminary agreement with Kurdish authorities in the north, which ultimately should lead to the Kurds becoming part of the broader Syrian government and broader security forces. And by the way, the Jordanians, despite concerns they may have been very helpful and very encouraging in our outreach to the Transitional Authority.
Very good. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Secretary, thanks for being here, and I appreciate our ongoing dialogue, even if we're in some disagreement about a number of things. I want to ask you, and I'm going to try to work the senator out of you here. A bunch of yes or no questions. They are not trick questions. Are you still the acting USAID administrator?
Yes.
Do you control hiring and firing at USAID?
Yes. Well, I delegate the authority to an administrator, but obviously, yes.
And you control hiring and firing at state?
Again, we obviously rely on our bureaus that do. I mean, it depends what that's a highly technical question. I don't hire the line officers in every embassy in this, but I mean, technically,
you're ultimately in charge.
Yes.
Okay. Did you personally review all the programs terminated during the foreign assistance review and personally make termination decisions?
Yes.
Do you have the authority to direct any state or USAID staff to brief Congress?
Yes.
Can you have Mr. Lewin or you come back to Congress and talk about USAID in the context of the coming end of the federal fiscal year and SFOPs and appropriations?
That's already planned to do that, not just him, but others, because we'll have to update you on that, on our organization, whatever OMB decides to do with money. So there's a host of things for us to all talk about.
So I just want to illustrate, whenever I talk with you, I feel pretty encouraged, and then stuff doesn't happen. I wrote 8 unanswered letters, and I request to enter those into the record without objection. And my staff has sent 200 unanswered questions, 200 unanswered questions about this much paper. Consultation is not a courtesy. It is required by law, and we have now 200, and these are perfunctory. What are you up to? What does this mean? This is the kind of normal pace of operations. Radio silence. Other than you're very responsive, your department and USAID has not been very responsive. Foreign Affairs Reform and Restructuring Act, the Empowerment Control Act, the Anti-Deficiency Act, the Foreign Assistance Act, and the annual appropriations bills for state and foreign operations have been violated in multiple ways. On March 12th, you wrote, "We plan to engage Congress as required both by law and reality before we start drafting a plan to bring USAID over under state." That did not happen. As you know, we have a pledge. We owe the Global Fund $1.3 billion. I spoke with the head of the Global Fund in response to my repeated requests and multiple other people's repeated requests. You told me that those funds were going to be released. It has not happened. I'd just like you to respond to that. And again, I like you. I like our working relationship. But what is happening is we have a good conversation, and then I don't know. It seems to be getting sandbagged underneath you in this vast bureaucracy.
Yeah, well, that's part of the reason why we want to reorganize, is to have less vast bureaucracy, but I wouldn't blame that on this. The first couple points, we believe and continue to believe that we have complied with the law on every step of the way, including through advising Congress of our roles, and even now with the reorganization. We have not issued a congressional notification yet. We issued a preliminary. We have taken input from members. I actually personally signed a letter that I think should have been delivered to you. I was overseas. I don't know if it was Monday or Sunday or Saturday, but it was in response to your latest letter.
Yeah.
So I hope you did get that. And obviously we'll continue to engage with you on all of this as well.
So the practical effect here, right? Because everyone can agree that, well, I don't know if everyone can agree, but it seems to me that most of us agree that there is virtue in reforming any big institution, and that aligning USAID's operations with the State Department and the President's and the Secretary's foreign policy objectives is beneficial. The question is, can we do this lawfully and in a way that doesn't damage our international reputation? Mothers who have fled Boko Haram in Nigeria are watching their babies starve. Children in South Sudan are dying of cholera. Families are dying because they have been cut off from their HIV medications. There are about 103 deaths an hour. And so we can talk about the reorganization of the State Department, but this becomes quickly not an abstraction, not a normal public policy tug and pull, because the way that this has been done, set aside our disagreement about whether it's been done lawfully, it's been done in a just catastrophic fashion. And so on some level, that's water under the bridge. But what I want from you is a commitment to try to get an appropriations bill that is done on a bipartisan basis that reconstitutes the foreign aid enterprise. I think we can do fewer things. I think we can be more narrow in our focus. But you are pushing on an open door, and instead of pushing on that open door, you are lighting the room on fire. Maybe that was not your intent. And I think we have two objectives right now: minimize suffering and reputational damage on one, that's one line of effort. And the other is, how do we get back to the regular order where we can do a bill together? And I'd like your thoughts in the remaining minute and a half.
Yeah, well, first of all, that is the intent here, right, is to rebuild the foreign aid enterprise under the State Department. By the way, it's something multiple secretaries of states before me have wanted to do, because we want foreign aid to be a part of our diplomacy toolbox and our way we engage the world, not its own separate entity, but all of it coordinated one with the other. So that's our hope on the reorg, and that's what we're trying to endeavor towards. I also don't think it's fair, by the way, you highlighted a couple points, like in South Sudan, there's distribution problems there. It's not just a program. PEPFAR is 85% operative right now. So you touched about HIV medication.
Secretary, you are required to spend 100% of the money, not 85% of the money.
But 15% of that is funding of programs that we've canceled. We're going to cancel those programs. We've rescinded because they don't reach the purpose of those are elements of individual programs, for example, that were not meeting the mandate of the program. They were not being delivered. We just the other day at the embassy level in Namibia identified fraud, where millions and millions of dollars of U.S. aid was found on the store shelves being resold into the marketplace. It was our ambassador who discovered it. We tried to work with local authorities to fix it, and it was not fixed. And he was weeping at the conference while announcing this decision because he hated to do it. In some of the places you highlight, it's important to remember, even if the money is distributed, sometimes it cannot be brought out. The aid does not reach people because armed elements in Sudan, in South Sudan, are impeding aid from reaching their intended recipients.
It's a very complicated world in terms of the delivery of aid. The one point I'd like to
Senator, you're out of time.
With your indulgence,
yeah.
30 more seconds. And you and Senator Murphy had an exchange about this. It is just not true that only 12% of the aid reaches recipients. The way you get to 12% is it's 12% local NGOs. So that is excluding CARE, that is excluding the World Food Program, that is excluding Catholic Relief Services. And so if you're going to count that as like overhead or inefficiency, Secretary Rubio, you and I have honest disagreements, but that number has been given to you and is not an accurate assessment of the extent to which aid reaches the people who need it. And I will just say, if there's an enterprise to reduce overhead, count me in.